Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Zara Arshad. I am one of the faculty members with Global Remote Research Scholars Program. And today in this very small talk, which is going to be maybe 15-20 minutes or so, myself, Dr. Kashyap and Dr. Nawaz will be discussing with you how you basically write a results section and then a discussion section. Why are we discussing it together? Because both these sections usually are the most confusing for somebody who's writing a manuscript for the first time, because the major confusion is always what to write in the results and how is it different from what you're writing in the discussion. So because the results section is before the discussion section, I will be walking you through what you should be writing in the results. And then Dr. Nawaz and Dr. Kashyap will be expanding on how you're basically writing your discussion section. So for the starters, I will let you know how exactly a results section is written, and then I will go over some examples using some different study designs. And then we'll see how a results section could differ in all of those study designs. So generally, the basic principle of what we're doing in a results section is we are describing the result. We are not trying to tell an interpretation of the result. We are not trying to tell an implication of the results, nor are we discussing. We are stating a fact that we have found this in our analysis and this is it as it is. And that's it. Then you postulate each one of your result section by section if you have as many as whatever your study design was. So basically, generally, you start describing a result one by one in an initial paragraph. For example, if it's a cross-sectional study, you start by describing your demographics. If it's another kind of study, you drop in and start discussing the different categories of your result. If you have categories, it's better for you to give your results section subheadings, such as a demographics section. Then you go into some cross-tabulations or comparisons. If you have tables or if you have some standard deviations and other statistics to measure, to mention, then you make that an other heading or a subheading. Further, the best thing that you should be doing in each result section is that you summarize your results in the form of tables or illustrate them as figures. These figures can be images, diagrams, can be graphs, can also be charts, depending on the kind of result that you were able to analyze in your study, which are different from study to study. And we will discuss some of the examples here. Now, how may these results section differ from study to study? For example, if you're doing a cross-sectional study, which is an observational kind of a study, you have very specific, straightforward results to mention. You start with mentioning your demographics. You start with mentioning go on to mentioning your study population. If you have any comparative measure, you start comparing the groups. You start mentioning that this group had that group had that. And then you go into any further analysis if you have done. If this was a cohort or a case control study, for example, then you have separate paragraphs describing your odds ratio, your confidence intervals, and other confounders and variables. Each of them section by section or each sentence by sentence. If by any chance it was a systematic review or meta-analysis, the studies that have the longest sections of results, you go in describing each result again, one by one. And this would be different from other studies because the kind of analysis here were different. Like for example, in systematic review or meta-analysis, you will see sections like a prisma flow diagram in your results section. You can see summaries of forest plots or heterogeneity stats, or sometimes even further analysis or quality assessment measures. Now, if these were not, if your section or if it's a totally different study design, if it's not an observational study, nor is it a systematic review or meta-analysis, it could be a randomized controlled trial, a basic science study, or qualitative study, which is beyond what we do within this cohort. So we will not be discussing on that much. However, if you go into any study of that sort, the results section of those studies will look completely different to you because, again, they have layers and layers of analysis done, mostly a lot of statistics involved. Let's go over and see some very small examples. I have 3 in front of me. One is going to be a social media cross-sectional study. The second one, an observational cross-sectional questionnaire-based study, and then a systematic review and meta-analysis. If we go with this first one, this is a published study, very recently published. The topic is global health truly global? A hashtag analysis of hashtag global health disparities on X. Now going down to the results section directly, if you see, since this was a very straightforward cross-sectional analysis, we had retrieved the data from a statistical analysis software. The results are mostly only describing what we got out of that software. The study analyzed a large number of posts. These posts were shared by this many people. Then among the context of the post retrieved through similar signals, some associating hashtags with this many. Going down, we have a tabulation of those co-occurring hashtags. Then, did we find any stakeholders? And if we did, we have mentioned them each with their statistics, just as one sentence or two. Then we have a figure that explains the same thing. Then going down again, describing the third variable, which in this case was where do the posts originate from? And all of this data down here is mentioned in a map. Going down further, another variable, which was where the most influential posts came from. And this, we did not bother putting in a table for this because more the tables, the confusing it gets. It's always recommended to keep tables and figures for the most important results. So that is how the whole result sections looks like. Now, what all of these results mean and how we are comparing these to other studies, that goes into the discussion section. That's with a cross-section study. Going back to the second example, which was a global study on violence among healthcare workers, which was published a year or two ago. Now, this study had some layers of results. Let's go over them together. So as you see, like I mentioned, this was a questionnaire-based survey, which was an online survey. The results start from describing how the survey responses looked like, only describing what we got in those survey responses. The responses were collected from over 110 countries. There were 34 responses were included because of due to unavailability of demographic data. Then 5,477 responses, countries were less than 10. This is exactly what was happening. It's just a description of what had happened when we were analyzing the results. The table below exactly summarizes what is written above it. Going down below, these are the demographics. All of these demographics have also been explained in a paragraph below, which is the usual protocol. Then another variable was violence characteristics of the survey respondents. Goes down into tables. The tables always have to mention the statistics and the percentages and have a description below it. Now, each layer of results go in a separate paragraph and a separate table. Going back to the last set of study, which is a systematic review and a meta-analysis, which usually are the difficult most to read, but generally are not as bad when you start understanding what's happening in the results. Going down directly to the results section. So an initial paragraph describing how everything had happened when we analyzed it, how many studies were retrieved, how many participants were there that we're going to talk about in the systematic review and the analysis ahead, what exactly were the articles about, why did we include those articles, and why were they excluded by any chance, and all of them summarized in a Prisma diagram. Then going down below, patient and study characteristics, description of them in as many paragraphs as possible, depending on the number of studies. And then if required, or most of the time, you will necessarily find tables below to summarize those, or a forest plot. Then if you go into further analysis, which is a meta-regression or other continuous variables depending on the depth of analysis you're going into, you add in each paragraph describing those results and add a table or a figure to explain that. And such as you can see, there are subgroup variables analyzed in this study. Each goes in below with its own table, keep describing the results. But again, not explaining what a lot of it is meaning, because that is where the discussion part comes in. And that would be it. And I would be happy to have your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Arshad. I would just add one thing on this video today is that the biggest mistake a novice writer or researcher does it, that they're just listing down the results. They'd say this was 35% versus 45%, p-value this and this, and so on and so forth as well. So I would say that be a little bit bold and add one sentence interpretation of what does it mean, saying this is higher in this group or lower in that group as well. So what happens is you're not just writing numbers. You're telling that most people were male or female, less people. So use those words where you're actually giving the layman's language, where you're talking about what was higher, what was lower, is it more beneficial or not. So you're not starting interpreting the result too much, but you are giving the layman's terms where people can understand what does it mean. Because if you just put numbers, it becomes very, very dry, and then you're missing the point around it as well. So I'd like to add that in result section, please do add your interpretation or your mentor's interpretation. What do these numbers mean? But not it at length. You're just mentioning it within the same sentence or adding one more sentence for that matter. Everything else about those results need to be discussed in discussion section. So with that caveat, I would like to stop the meeting, stop the recording, and see if you have any other questions.